In our last video, we had created this component inside our storybook project, which allowed us to have the list of categories and their subcategories, and also we had this apply filter button functionality, which would help us basically send the information what are the different subcategories that a user has selected and wants to apply filter on. Now that is inside the storybook, and in this video what we will do is we will take that component and try to implement it inside our Vendor project. So the first thing that you need to do is, obviously what I did was copied this entire product filters folder inside my web client folder. Okay, this is the Next.js installation or the code base, right? Inside that I have components, and inside components I have product filters. Now, if we go inside our code base, the product filter first of all has the high level component, which is this entire container, and it renders the categories and the subcategories along with this two buttons, right? So if we quickly do a recap, product filters component uses a state which is filtered items and set filtered items, and then there is this function which takes care of the click of individual items and the handle form reset. After that we have this markup which starts doing the categories and stuff, and then inside that I have one more component which is product filter item, which is this tsx file, which is basically rendering individual categories. So after the container, the category and the subcategories will be rendered inside this product filter item. So as you can see, it has field set. We are naming the category over here, and then we are running a loop, or rather a map function, to render every subcategory. Now, if you want to see in details about how this is done, I would recommend you view the previous video in this playlist, which talks about how we went ahead and created that particular component, rather this component, from Hyper UI, and we refactored, or rather, yeah, refactored that markup into a React.js based component, right? So now, when we want to implement it inside our project, the first thing that I have done is, obviously, if we go inside our pages, index, I have added a component over here called sidebar. Now, if we go inside our components, layout, not layout, rather sidebar, index.tsx, let me close these things for now. Inside the sidebar now, I tried using a custom hook inside it. My thought process was that the sidebar will have some functionality in it, for example, fetching the data of the different facets that the vendor store provides, and we would also need to modify the data of the page based on the filters that have been applied, right? So I decided, why don't we create a custom hook for that? So inside the sidebar we have this custom hook which is providing us the facet data, and then I have a state over here. I'll go into the details of the use facet data in a bit. Okay, so I have this state, oops, undo, and I have a use effect which changes based on the data which is coming from my custom hook, and when the data changes, right, I am checking whether I have that data and whether the length is greater than 0 or not. If it is, then what I do is I set my state variable, which is the pf items, which basically means product filter items, to the new facet data which I have. And then obviously I am passing that data to facet data component, which is supposed to render that particular data in a format, because if you see, what I'm doing is the entire data which is coming from Vendor, I am running this map function and I am massaging that data into a format which makes sense for me. For example, it needs to have a facet name and facet values. Facet values needs to be an array, and it should have ID and name, I think, right? And yeah, based on that, what will happen is the component will get rendered. So this is where the rendering logic comes in. Obviously, as you understand, for this entire thing to work, the important piece is how we get the facet data, which we are going to dive in a bit. But then product filters, we are passing the prop facet data. I mean, again, this is something which is part of the filter component that we have developed. And on apply filter is the function which gives us the selected items when a user clicks on any of these. For example, let me open up my console, clear this out. And if I now apply filter, I will see that two items are selected. Facet values, it's electronics ID 1, Apple ID 3. So this is how the component which we created is now interacting with Vendio. But as I said, in this, the main piece is this use facet. So let's go inside the definition and understand how I went ahead and created this component, rather this custom hook. So the name of this custom hook is use facet. Now, obviously, if you don't know, when creating a custom hook, your function name should be starting with use. Otherwise, React will not recognize it or honor it. Now, this use facet function is returning a type of data which is use facet hook type. I had to define it so that when I come here and destructure this, right? Not like this. Oops, what happened? Right. I get this hint because now TypeScript knows what is being returned, what type of information is coming. Okay. So I declared that I am going to return use facet hook type, which will have facet data, which is an array of facet items. Facet items is nothing but ID, name, and array of, right now I have set it to unknown. Okay, but it's a value of ID and name. Okay. Then I have a state inside this state, custom hook, okay, which is facet data, and then we have the set facet data function available as well. And then I'm running a not a mutation, but a query, a GraphQL query, which is running facet query as a parameter, right? Let's quickly look at this. So facets, total items, and then ID, name, code, and then values have ID and name as well. What basically this does is it returns all the facet information from the vendor store API. So let me quickly show you that. If I run this query, you can see everything which is available as facets is available. So at the main category level, we have category and then its values. Then we have brand and its values, color and its values, so on and so forth, right? So with that information as a GraphQL query, what I was able to do is run that query, and I'm saying that when we get this data, right, this use effect, what it does is it sets this set facet data. Now, if we have any loading error, if we are in a state of loading or error, we only send the facet data, which initially is an empty array. But then because we have a use effect, what happens is when the query gives us a data, right, this function will be executed again. And at that point, I'm seeing whether data has facets and facets as items, right? If it is, then I set that thing over here and I return that as part of the hook. And so what happens is, obviously, once this data which is coming from this custom hook changes, because we have a use effect over here as well, right? The state variable inside this sidebar component changes, and based on that, we are able to render our data. So yeah, there can be certain kinds of refactorings possible. For example, I'm thinking whether it makes sense to have this custom hook inside the sidebar component itself, and then based on that, I change raise an event. Let's just say the sidebar component will raise an event saying that this is the final set of data which the page needs to render, and based on that, when the page re-renders itself. For example, what I mean by that is, let's say I selected electronics with brand as Apple, right? So now when I click on this list should ideally change, right? So what I can do is I can, the sidebar basically can raise an event to the page, and the page then understands that okay, there are some changes in the listing, and so it will run the query again. For example, in the home page, right, the sidebar will raise an event, and I will have to, instead of this get static props, I'll have to run one more query on the client side and fetch the fresh information based on the filters that have been applied. But yeah, this is how we created a custom hook inside our project. We use that custom hook to get information or data from an API which is internally running a GraphQL query, and yeah, we are able to, based on that, show this facet information. So that's about it, guys. If you like this video, do click on the thumbs up icon and don't forget to subscribe to my channel.